Welcome, Tim Gilberts.
Hi, Sean. Pleased to be
Hiya.
here.
So Tim's probably one of the two men responsible for the massive adventure boom in the mid 1980s on computers. So welcome. So how did it all begin? How did you get into computers and electronics and so on?
Um, it probably stems back to my dad. I would have thought that he was a telecoms engineer, and had been in his national service, had done radio engineering in the signals. So it was like electronics was part of the hobby that he had, and I sort of picked that up. But I think it really started when he bought me electronics kit, probably when I was I don't know, eight or nine or something like that, because I always
Mm.
fiddle about with the bits. So he bought me this Logix Cosmos electronics kit where he breadboard and tried to build a radio, and it was a bit too complicated, but we got it working, and I was just so fascinated with electronics from then on. So that's really where it stemmed from, is that it was around in the family, and Dad
Mm.
always had like a side hustle selling doorbells or whatever happened to be the current thing he was doing. He sold radios when he was a kid and things. So these sort of 24 time door chimes, I was building them for him in the attic, and that's really, it just became part of what I did. It was my hobby, and I think involved a little bit with photography as well, because my granddad was into cinema and photography. So the two were the main hobbies, I suppose, when I went out and about roaming the streets. So
Hmm. What were your first experiences of computers?
um very first experience of computers was probably sort of playing Space Invaders and Pong, I suppose, in terms
Mm.
of, I remember we trying to think, if we're talking about this and the other night with some friends about where we'd first seen them. And I think mine was on a sort of holiday in Saundersfoot in West Wales,
Mm.
Space Invaders machine there or something like that. But I suppose going further back, my dad had built me one of those Pong consoles in the
Oh,
70s,
great.
as a sort of present. Built it from a kit that he bought. So that was probably my first experience of what was it really a computer, wasn't it? It was like, but yeah, actually then it was, I'd sort of, through the electronics magazines, I'd been reading all the stuff about available computer kits in the late 70s, and I wanted to build one of the kits because it was electronics, and it looked, well, MPUs, they're all there. So that was my sort of first understanding of them, was reading through magazines. But I think the first time I ever touched one was in the computer club in school.
Mm.
One of the maths and the RE teachers had brought in their own computers, a ZX80 and later a TRS-80 Model 1 for the students in the maths classes to have a play in an after-school event. So my diary entry said I went to computer club. It was quite interesting. So yeah, that's really the first one I had to take, and I definitely decided I was going to buy one then, because I'd not had the money to build the kit, I'll buy the kit. So started saving the money to buy a ZX80 kit, and by the time I had enough money, the ZX81 was out, and I bought that kit, and the rest, they say, is history, really. So it didn't work, of course. I had to send it back to Sinclair. It wasn't my fault. It was a faulty ZX80 Z80 in it, apparently. So I was
Right.
told when it came back to me. So in a broken state, which I did manage to repair.
So, like a lot of people, you started off programming as well. So, did you do the usual route of basic and then into machine code?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I was obviously, everyone had to play with basic, and I
Yeah.
remember mates coming around, and we only had 1K of RAM, but we managed to get Space Invaders moving across the screen with print statements, and
Mm.
you all start like that, don't you? And one long before I ordered a 16K memory pack for it. And then my school project was to do a chart recorder, a Meccano, and a stepper motor, and you
Mm.
really couldn't get enough control from basic. It wasn't accurate enough, so I really had to learn assembly language from the back of the ZX81 manual with notes, and because there was just enough in there for you to get an idea,
Mm.
and magazine articles, and just playing with it really. And obviously bought Zach Z80's guide, and just sort of pursued it from there. And it was more necessity, because that you needed assembly language to do anything really significant. So that's why I put my mind to. I'll learn assembly language.
Hmm. Well, you started off writing arcadey type games, didn't you?
Yeah, I think like most people, it was
Mm.
whatever you could copy the arcade games. I was a 3D maze game, which was a bit of hybrid of basic and assembler.
Mm.
So the assembly language for rendering the actual three-dimensional maze. And again, that stemmed from an early site on the ETI had published this computer called the Triton, which I'd always wanted to build. And they'd had in one of the issues of the magazine, they slightly later they'd shown a 3D maze, and I thought, I really want to do that. And then of course, on the ZX81 you had Monster Maze, so I wanted to do something like that. So that was that one. We did a version of Pac-Man. And the sort of classic chase games, with the fox and hen one, but this was like bears and you had to trap them in the ice holes, and a snake game, pursuing snakes, and I mean it's classic variations of the games you read in magazines and things like that. And that was really how we that was the sort of basis of getting those written, but they were on the spectrum. I mean, on the ZX81 it was more about technical stuff like motor control and interfacing, and that was because that was my school projects, things like that. But I'd always fancied writing a game, obviously, so that was the way. But it was the spectrum that really started me writing games like that. So just before anyone expects hundreds of lost games on the ZX81 to suddenly come out the woodwork.
Well, you got your first games published by a different company, didn't you? An external company.
Well, yes and no. We were already publishing games ourselves, because Dad and I had set up Gilsoft, but there was another company in Barry who was a distributor of software called Bitewell. The Hidden City arcade game, which I'd been writing, I did for them because they had a big distribution network, and we were still selling quite small quantities through mail ordering, so they wanted a game they could sort of start getting commissioning. So I did that, as he was a friend of the family and one of the stockists of our games. So they sort of in parallel, really, at the same time. But that was the sort of final. I developed because you're on the spectrum, you've got no sprites or anything. I'd written all the software to do that, and call it games a bit loose term, really. It was more stringing together a pile of routines I'd written into something with some graphics. But and the other reason probably it was it's a bit unknown, the Hidden City.
Well, how did you meet Graeme Yendle?
Graeme Yendle? Oh,
Yendle, sorry.
I shall tell you the story of that. We were selling out of our home, Maze of Gold, around that Christmas of '82, because we got the software out very early, really. And he bought a few games. He lives in Cardiff, which is only about 10 miles away from us. And he bought a lot of stuff from the backs of magazines, and I think his term was his quality's really poor. So he wanted to see before he bought. So he just called at the address. And of course, a lot of magazines were black and white then, weren't they? So I'd only seen black and white photographs of Clive Sinclair. Didn't realise he had ginger hair. I was like, this guy walking down the drive. I thought, Clive Sinclair's going, what have we done now? Because we'd already had a cease and desist from Atari on not selling the Pac-Man game, and a cease and desist from Sinclair for putting Sinclair's ZX Spectrum games on the title on the cover art. So we'd already had 2 cease and desists. So I thought we'd done something wrong again. He turned up, and I think it was Maze of Gold he saw. He was really impressed. He bought a copy, and that's how we got chatting. He said he was writing adventure games. And I'd like to say, I mean, I knew what an adventure game was. I'd had a couple for the ZX81, and then obviously for the Spectrum, so the early Charles Cecil ones from, Planet of Death and all the rest of it from Arctic Computing. So I played adventure from Abersoft, so I knew of them, and I played them, and I'd enjoyed them. So he offered to send us one. So he sent us down, I think it was Magic Castle maybe, to play with. And that's how I met him, really. It was just lucky called at the house.
So obviously you joined forces and you started to write titles together, didn't you? So why did you choose adventure games? Was it just because Graeme was writing them already?
Like you say, because Graeme was writing them already, and he had a sort of assembly language method for putting the database onto an interpreter. So it was he lent me the sort of assembly language tools and tape he had to do that. And I had a crack at writing an adventure game with it, because, well, why not, at the time, I mean, you remember from the early industry, people just wrote anything and threw it at the wall, commonly called the magazines in advertising, and see what sold, really. So, and adventure games seemed to be selling, so I wrote one. Diamond Trail, we started marketing his and mine. But we while I was sort of using that system to write a game, it was seen to me that it was nearly good enough that anyone could have a crack at writing a game. And it just seemed more logical that could we have something that was a bit easier to use. And that was the sort of thinking that led on to, I'm sure it's going to be a next question, but that's how we started writing together. So just again, anything sticks at the time,
Yeah.
I was 17 and anything was going to, maybe even 16 at the time, 17. And anything you could write would just get out the door and get in an advert. It's going to make you £6, wasn't it?
So that's obviously the roots of the Quill.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it is exactly the root of the Quill. And it was, for those who don't know the background, it was based on an article in one of the computing magazines that was written by a guy called Ken Reed, and he described in a sort of virtual language how you could write an interpreter to write games. And that was used in a lot. Actually, the interpreter in the Arctic games is the same one. There's one in the ZX81 Pocketbook. There's an adventure there. It's the same interpreter basis. I think it was used by a lot of people to understand how to write a condition and action type game. It was really quite an important article, I think, from Ken. And Graeme had followed that article to write that document, and it was just an easy way to write a game. It really focused everything in on the very minimum number of commands you needed to set up a room, an object, and a thing. But like Graeme said, it takes a lot more to write something that other people can use.
Yeah.
And the Quill was therefore a lot of work for him. He did the massive bulk of it. I can't take any credit really, other than persuading him that he'd probably sell more than 100 copies, which is what he thought he might do. And that it was a good idea. Just lots of debugging and hours on the phone of evenings and play testing and coming up with tweaks and suggest. But he's such a good programmer. Most of it was working when he first delivered it to me. We got really quite excited by it. I think that was probably coming up towards the end of '93. That was so. It was a fair amount of time during 1983 to develop it, because of course we had to get the manual typeset and printed, and it was quite a lot. There's a lot other than just writing the code and sitting the advert in, but that's what we did as a software company for him. That side of it, and provided the tape duplication services and things like that. Although at that time it was just a row of 8 cassette decks with play the master tape and press record on several of them. Although the Quill, we immediately had to go and find a tape duplicator. There was one in Port Talbot, not far from us. So, it really drove growth massively. That was the thing that pushed us from a couple of obscure programs into sort of half-page adverts, magazine articles, full-page adverts eventually. And the Quill, there's no two ways about it, was the driving force for the change. So,
the packaging was really impressive. I mean, it was a nice big box, wasn't it? Nice and glossy. So what did you get to do the artwork for the cover?
That's a difficult question, that one. The very, very, very earliest artwork, for people who haven't seen it, is actually in a different cover. It's got the same idea of the Quill pen on it. But it's actually done by one of my school friends, Stephen Harbron. And that was the initial sort of yellow one, which I think is quite prized by collectors now, because that was in a Ziploc bag with a proper printed manual on the cover and a cassette tape in that one. So that was done by him. But Dad had found an artist who lived not far from us on the road out to Cardiff Airport, or Roos Airport as it was known at the time. And I've been unsuccessful in finding his name, although we have got a lead, because apparently he did do the design for the crest and artwork that was on the Vale Morgan building. So I need to do a bit more pushing on that one. But it was a one-off commission done on a piece of black paper with giant size. I've got it here somewhere, but it is huge. It's about 4.5 feet high, so it's quite a big original. And then it was obviously properly laser scanned and turned into artwork. But of course, these days we benefit from Mark Hardesty's redraw of it, which he did very nicely, which is why we got T-shirts and things from it. So, and he said you're never going to draw a feather again. But yeah, no, I wish I could give you the name of the original artist, but he said he was from this area, from Barry. So maybe we'll find it one day. I'm still looking. So
how long did it take before the Quill started to really take off, from the very early adverts up to when it was everywhere?
I would have said probably by very early of 84, it was starting to sell, because we had, we'd started selling it sort of mid 83, and we'd had the new Quill artwork done by the Christmas of 83. There's some photos from the micro fair with us with the new artwork, but without the cardboard box yet. So I think we were still waiting for that to be made.
Yeah.
But it definitely had the new artwork commissioned, and we were starting to get orders and things from shops, so it was definitely starting to poke forward very fast by early 84. I mean, a lot of the magazines were picking it up by then, some of the things, Tony Bridges reviews and those, they were absolutely enthusiastic about it, and that's what sells. It's not adverts, it's the reviews sell things, people's view is important to people, that other people have said it's good, and that's what was really starting to sell it for us. We were lucky as well. We had a couple of good distributors who we could get into, and we'd managed to get in, I think, very early on into Smiths, so we took a good volume of them. So it just became a self-propelling machine, really.
Did you have to add any additional parts to the code from feedback from the customers? Were they calling or getting in touch and saying, how about adding this or that or anything like that?
Occasional ones that came a lot later, which was some of the things we put into Paw. But I mean, there were some. One of the ones, obviously the biggest one, which Graeme said he can't believe he never did in the first one, was the ability to change the system messages, because they were fixed. What do you want to do next, and hello, goodbye. They were all fixed messages, which was a bit, in hindsight, was silly. By the time we did the Commodore 64 version, they were editable, and we did do a C series revision for the Spectrum then that actually allowed you to edit the system messages. So yes, there was a bit of feedback from people that those fixed things were a bit poor. But I think it was so well put together and self-contained that there wasn't a lot. It was, there wasn't much you could do to improve it without just adding extra features for nothing. And the language itself was powerful enough. You could add them in the language. So it was actually easier for us to give people some instruction sheets on how to do it with the existing language, because it's a pretty complete language with, you make decisions. You don't need much more to write stuff in it. So
how difficult was it to port between the different computers?
It wasn't too bad, actually. We once I think Graeme did a 6502 port of the code onto the Commodore 64. I ported that code to the Oric, and obviously ports to other Z80s like the Amstrad were fairly straightforward. Because it was assembly language. Once you had a transcode into the 6502, that would have been the biggest one. The one we never finished was the 6809 for the Dragon. That was again, it was because the amount of effort to convert it from 6502 or Z80 into 6809 and do it that way. Once you have a processor under your belt, which is why you've sort of a lot of stuff moving between the same processor machines, Amstrad and the Spectrum, it was fairly easy to port stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else we did. It was fairly straightforward, but you had to learn that machine and obviously buy it and get the associated equipment with it, and there was quite a lot to do. But once you've done those key points, it's not too bad. So Graeme did the heavy lifting of the transcode from Z8 to 6502. So sorry, that was that made life a lot easier when you were moving to another 6502 platform.
Yeah. So the GAC came out, the graphic adventure created by another company. Did you ever look at that, and what did you think about it?
Yeah, we did. Funny enough, we've as you probably know, after Quill, we brought out the one that the graphics package Illustrator. So we already had a graphics package available for Quill, but it was separate. Now, our thinking was, and it's the way we worked, is the Illustrator was very rarely the person who's writing the game.
Yeah.
Bear with me a minute. Sorry, got a bit of a cough. So there was so having a separate package seemed more logical. Plus, of course, it allowed us to use the area of memory where the Quill had been for the drawings. Yeah. Useful memory. So we were planning a combined package called Quill Illustrator, I think, by code name. When GAC came out, we thought, oh, crumbs. This all self-contained pack was going to be appealing. But Dad's view was, well, competition's always good for stuff because it just drives the whole market up. So and some of the limitations on it being forth-based, not as easy to get into as the contact method. You had to be a programmer.
Yeah.
I have to pause a minute, mate. Hang on.
Sure.
Yeah, sorry about
That's all right.
that. So you had to be a bit of more of a programmer to use GAC, I think, and
Yeah.
that plus its limitation in terms of having to fit all the editor into memory meant that you had areas of unused memory for it. But yeah, it was really good, and considering it had come out of the left field and provided a really powerful tool, it was a good tool. But it can only benefit everybody, can't it? Having one compiler, more than one graphics package. It drove the whole interest in the adventure scene. So it was, but it did mean I pushed like heck to get Professional Adventure Writer finished and get it as it was called then. And we really did need to bring in, because we had a couple of different add-ons from Phil Wade with the patch and the press, the compression system, and we needed to get the graphics package illustrated. So putting it all into one pack was important to us, but of course we did it slightly differently by using the overlays, so you could use all of memory.
Right.
And that was the sort of, we thought might be the killer feature for it. And of course we supported disks and micro drives and Opus disk, Disciple, all the major disk drives for the Spectrum. Shame we never finished the Commodore 64 version of it, but it nearly got there, but not quite.
So, well, I know you teamed up with a few other companies, didn't you, to do sort of variations on the Quill. So it was it the Swan system with Fergus McNeil?
Yeah, well, that was the sort of commission that came out of. Obviously, we had the American versions, which we'd done through CodeWriter, who licensed versions of Quill into the US market. They also, I did an Atari conversion for them to the Atari 800, and then they converted it to the Apple. And I'd forgotten, but they did convert to the IBM PC, but we had our own IBM PC version as well.
Yeah.
Theirs was different because it used graphics loaded from disk, so slightly different environment. But that's effectively what Fergus wanted to do, was to have proper images loaded from disk that weren't drawn using the vector design language. So you just draw them in our package and load them. And so he'd been a big user, obviously, of the systems over the years, and approached us whether we could do something custom for him, because you're setting up a new organization through with working with Activision, I think, to set up Abstract Concepts. It was.
Yeah.
So that would be a system for them to be able to develop their games, but they wanted to move towards sort of icon control as well. So on mouse systems, it would support the mice. So on the Amiga and the ST, you could use the mouse, drag the icons for save load. In actual fact, the icon system that we developed for Swan could do other things. It was verb noun based, so you could have an icon for an action, for a word and an object as well. So you could act on it. You could have gone much more graphical if you'd wanted with it, but I suppose that would have been the sort of future developments. But I don't think much more was published after the first game that was done with, which is Mindfighter.
Yeah.
It never really saw the light of day in a lot more environment than that. But obviously that game's quite well respected these days, I think. Although it was a classic big box, but with a novel and all the rest of it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Post-apocalyptic. So that was a commission between myself, Hugh, Hamer Powell, and Graeme to write custom versions of code. I can't remember who worked on which bits, but it's all over the place. So we were just sort of worked for about 9 months to a year, I think, on developing extra features for it, and graphic conversion tools, all the background tools you needed to draw it on one system and convert it to others and things like that.
Oh, okay. Was it right in thinking that you'd worked with Melbourne Draw as well with some of their games?
No, Melbourne House used a version of the
House,
which they customed themselves, I think. Is that what you're thinking of?
Yeah, I think
we actually used to use Melbourne Draw for all our graphics.
Yeah, me too.
Our artists used to use it. Was that from Melbourne House as well? I can't remember. Yeah,
it was. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So then, I mean, although they said that they used the Quill, it was a custom version of it, I think, that they had to hack about themselves with.
Yeah.
Never really quite looked into that, but so they had some extra features because they published things like Torremolinos and Hampstead, was it?
That's right.
They were done, I think, with that custom version that they talked about. So Again, there was no, we didn't stop people doing that. It was so when she bought the package, which of course wasn't cheap, to be honest. The Quill was quite an expensive program at $14.95. It was quite an investment, but again, we had to make our money on the initial sale because we got nothing afterwards.
Yeah. How many did it sell in total?
Yeah, we've been trying to work that out. It must have been a lot.
Yeah.
Because Graeme will say that he earned as much as his main job in royalties for a year or two. So and we didn't. I mean, the royalties weren't huge. Although it was $14.95 for the Quill, for example. By the time you gave 70% discount to Smiths and produced the content of it, the actual profit, I was only about £3 or £4 and 10%. You're only making £1 or so royalties on it, I would have thought.
Yeah.
So we must have sold 50,000-60,000 copies, I would have thought, maybe more. Probably maybe higher, but across all the systems, I would have thought we had 70,000-80,000 copies of the software sold.
Yeah. There's quite a lot of games come out, obviously. I mean, it's thousands and thousands of games. Are there any favourites that you played?
Myself,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a dirty secret. I really never had the time to play a lot of them through to detail. Obviously, the ones we were evaluating, we were looking at, but my adventure game was running a software business really and writing software. I was very focused on that. I almost stopped playing games when we were running a business because, well, for a lot of people, I saw a post the other week about someone saying about the today's sort of crunch is there for someone else's work, but for you were working for yourself almost, and you didn't mind doing 70 hours or 3 o'clock in the morning because you were just enthusiastic to finish that bit of code. And that was actually what got me the enthusiasm was writing the code. But yeah, I did like playing them. I mean, I loved the most of Fergus's games I had a good play at. I did like his humor, so I played most of those. And some of the trying to think one that was particularly. I did have a good go through Hampstead and Dennis to the Drinking Glass. They were good games, and obviously all ours that we picked, things like Africa Gardens, and they were good games. I enjoyed playing in Mindbender. So if I had to pick one, I quite like Madcap Manor, which was graphically illustrated. So from our own games, they were good, and quite a few we did I had a good go at playing quite a lot that were written for the adventure competition the year before last. So I did set myself a couple of hours every time for each machine, each game to have a go, and that was fun. That was good. There was some good entries for that year. I like the bird and the tree. That was quite clever. Reminiscent of Ticket, the training one in the Poor manual.
Were any companies interested in taking over the Quill and Port from you?
No, we never really had anybody sort of offer to buy us out or do anything like that. I think, by the time we'd taken it all the way to its ultimate goal, I think, is that, by then the sort of interest in adventure games was waning a bit. So by then maybe it was less of interest,
Yeah.
So we never really had any negotiations with anyone to move it on. And I'd moved on. We were doing the consultancy work for other companies, doing porting of games between systems, and obviously after Swan we also did the DARD for the Spanish adventure company, and that was pretty much the sort of where I ended up, and that pretty much left mum and dad selling the residual stock and things like that. So it didn't so much die as just fade away as a product. But like anything, we just didn't come up with another killer, did we?
Well, it's a great legacy, though, isn't it? I mean, not only your own work, but I mean, you launched 1,000 careers as well, didn't you?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, we're ultra proud of what we did, and absolutely shocked and amazed that it did so well at the time. It was a real privilege, and I used to run the helpline on a Tuesday night with people they'd phone in and they'd be sat around for an hour or two, and people, the adventure outline, it was Quill outline. We had a phone call from someone who was playing Colossal Cave on a PDP one night at work, asking how to do something in the cave, which I happened to know because I had played it. So it wasn't quite what it was about, but it was a lot of people who were enjoying their games, and that's the bit that really I enjoy, is the fact that everyone else enjoyed it. And I can imagine you've seen quite a few posts over the years of, oh, I did this and I did that game for my friends and we shared it. And that was that sort of knowing other people were creating using your tools. That's brilliant. That's what they should be for, is to create tools that other people get enjoyment out of, because there's nothing quite like creating your own things to give you a real buzz. It's great playing others and consuming them, and I'm a big fan of doing other things. I still play games today and still watch television, and I still read books and I still listen to music. But there's also a great thing about making stuff as well, isn't there? That's one of the great joys in life, I think.
Well, you go to a lot of conferences, don't you, as well, and you show off a lot of the old, I don't want to call them artifacts, it makes it sound like a museum, but sort of older covers and that sort of thing.
Oh yeah, I am. I am a traveling museum when I go to the shows. Depends on what type of show it is. For certainly for things like Crash and Zap, I've taken along wider adventure stuff, because I don't just have Gilsoft items. From back in the day, I've got copies of GAC. I've got copies. I've got lots of adventures that we played. And I tried to take along a range of things that give the history of adventures. And sometimes you'll catch me with some of the older machines, like I've got a reconstructed MK14, which was Clive Sinclair's early computer. And on that, I've got probably what is the earliest adventure you could play on one of his computers, which was a maze game written by the guy who ran the user group. And it's quite close to an adventure game. It's not far away, and using an interpreter database as well. So several years in the 1970s, 1978, something like that, long before we were really doing it. And I've also got a Heathkit H8, which I take along to some of the bigger vintage shows. You tend not to find those at the ones but yeah, with vintage computer shows, probably the first time you could play a proper copy of Adventure on a computer you could buy at home. Written by the same guy who wrote it for the IBM PC that made it famous. The Adventure. He actually produced it for the Heathkit H8 first. I mean, you'd have had to have nearly $9,000 to put one together, I think. But yeah, you would have been able to play that adventure game on it. And I do like preserving the history of not just adventure games, of these sort of systems. So yeah, I don't think it's unfair to call me a traveling museum. And I like going to the shows. I love seeing what other people have got and chatting to people, especially when I'm doing the Gilsoft stuff. Chatting to people who've used the products, and the number of people you meet who are just have had such great use out of it, or are still using it today, producing really good quality stuff. And they're great to chat to, So.
Yeah. Well, what are you up to these days?
Say again?
What are you doing these days in terms of a job?
In terms of a job, I'm still doing my normal job. I work as an IT program manager for the fire service. Yeah. So I look after computer systems that run 909 centres and things like that. So that's pretty much what I still do. It's not a lot of computing involved in this. Basically, finance, procurement, testing, fault and diagnosis, and just generally anything that needs doing in that area of computing as a manager. Right. So looking after staff and things like that. So that's still my career. That was sort of what I went into in the mid-90s when I moved out of writing computer software for a living. I sort of moved into that area and that's been my career ever since. So I'm still doing that. I'm 60 next year, so I'll probably be thinking about how much longer I want to be doing it for, but going to computer vintage shows and things like that, and they're really good fun, and I enjoy doing those, and I'd like more time to do the sort of things that contribute to those environments, and of course just to take part in the hobby, because as you know, I'm quite a big fan of all types of retro computing, not just any one particular model or thing. Hence my playing around with the Spectrum Next and all those sort of environments. I love anything that's to do with the retro environment. I'm a big collector. I've got a lot of machines and equipment, most of which is in boxes awaiting some form of repair on another. And I get a couple of hours in the Soldier 9. So.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for joining us, Tim. It's been amazing. It's a really interesting chat.
Yeah, wow. Okay, that's gone quick. Hopefully it's been interesting, Sean, and it's been nice to catch up with you. And well done on the books, by the way. I've thoroughly enjoyed those. And
thank you very much.
You realise how much was written with the system when you go through your brace. Like the number there are quilled is unbelievable, isn't it? So,
absolutely. Like I said, your legacy is massive, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Something to be proud of, I think, for Graeme and myself. So Yeah, brilliant. All right then, Sean. Well,
You take care,
lovely to
mate. Thank
catch
you.
up, and we'll speak to you soon.
Cheers, mate. Thank you. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.